All right. I guess we can just start at project layout. So there were some things renamed and moved around, in particular in the BPMN packages. We have, that should be deleted, obviously. It's probably on my local, we have MSO BPMN infrastructure, which is just hosting now the
And
container.
Steve, because last week's meeting was not recorded, so is it also possible to have a little brief? I would suggest we will have a little brief of MS API handler and then come back to this. Okay, that will be better because we will have this session uploaded into the wiki. Okay.
Okay. So API handler again is split into API handler common, API handler infra. If you have not worked on Spring Boot apps, okay, it's organized where you have application test YAML. The data.sql is inserting some reference data for our unit test. The schema.sql is applying the schema to the in-memory database we're using in some of our tests. We're using an in-memory MariaDB instance, since that's what we're using in our live system. The layout of the packages really hasn't changed. Obviously, we have the Spring Boot app, which is in this root package. It is the API handler application. It's currently using Jersey, although since some of the other containers are using CXF, since they're mixing SOAP and REST, I may, just for consistency's sake, get rid of Jersey and use CXF everywhere, because it's slightly confusing. We have to do this one first, and we chose Jersey, and then we went to the other ones and realized we had to support JAX-W as well, and CXF was a lot easier to do that in. But here's your endpoints that are registered to the container.
Hi, Steve. This is Santita. The font is very small. Is there any way to increase the font?
To increase the font, I don't know. Let me see if I swap.
Steve, what you can do is you can change the display settings of your screen. You are using Linux or is it Windows? Is it Linux or Windows?
I'm using a Mac.
Just press Control plus, and it will just increase the font size.
Yeah, that is one way.
Okay.
Well, it will increase the font size only for the editor, not the. Yeah, just try.
Right.
There we go.
Is that sorry? So my home monitor is fairly high resolution, so it probably sets up funny. So that's API handlers. Not much has changed. All the endpoints are there. You have your end-to-end services endpoints, your service instances endpoint. The biggest difference being that we're currently using JPA repos. I don't know why I was playing with the formatter, so it probably laid out the annotations weird. We have been slowly ripping these out and replacing them with REST calls. If you saw the change yesterday, that's the first of many that will come, to try and decouple this container from directly accessing database tables that all the other containers are simultaneously accessing. So it'll just be over REST, and then the only two containers, when we're done with that, that would be touching database tables would be the request database adapter, the catalog database adapter, and then obviously Camunda has its own hidden tables that we don't read or write to. That was the first change yesterday of some of these being pulled out. We'll probably pull the other ones out over time. So if you're introducing new database reads, try to use the REST. There's a couple examples out there. Don't add additional dependencies on the database directly, if possible. There's a good number of tests. I don't know if you saw the latest report, but the coverage is up to 62%. So it was 12% jump when we merged the code. And we also tried to pull out any other code that we knew wasn't used in ONAP. If you know of any other code that's not used in ONAP that we missed, just open a Jira and we can remove it. That's API handlers. going back to the BPMN stuff. So we have a couple of new projects. So we have SO BPMN tasks. And these are really just Java delegates that can be utilized in your BPMN flows. Okay. This, for example, will get service type. We, again, are trying to follow the conventions of using optionals. And this one is just extracting the service instance ID from the general building block and then returning the service type. Let me see a more interesting one. Like here are some ANI create ones. You want to create a service instance in ANI. These are our decomp domain objects, right? So these are the MSO kind of model objects for service instance or customer that we pass around instead of just passing around the JSON. So this creates a service instance in ANI. This will create your service subscription. This creates the project, creating the owning entity, which is fairly complicated because you need to search first to see if it exists. This is just all inventory creation tasks, basically, that we can scroll through. If you need to add new ones, they're added. They're using a wraparound execution, so we don't have a direct dependency on Camunda. It's an abstraction. We also have the same kind of task setup, which some of them are broken right now, because SDNC pushed an update. So I can't run my build. This one calls our OpenStack adapters for network create. We have one for the VNFs. If you have flow specific things, we have a package for that. These are things that we don't think will be reusable outside of a specific BPMN flow. Okay, we have the SDNC task. So if you're talking to the controller, they're fully mapped out again from our domain objects to theirs, and then there's a client that deals with talking to them instead of going through the SDNC adapter. So the SDNC adapter is kind of written off as legacy. It really shouldn't be used anymore. We left it there because obviously some of the old flows use it, but none of the new code is utilizing that strange service. Let's see, there's some other tasks. There's the ANI mapper. This layer is just mapping ours to theirs. It uses an open source library called Model Mapper. For the most part, it will pattern match on all of the fields for you. Every now and then you have to override some fields and tell it to map, service type to, in our case, get model service info service type. It can't find going one depth in a POJO to find the mapping. But for the most part, it will automatically map things. We just write JUnits to verify that the library behaves the way we want. You'll see those JUnits in this package. And then you have the BPMN infra flows that we wrote that are all Java based. I think they're either in here or another place. These are the old ones. Let's see if we have other ones in this one. That's the old stuff. Let me find the new ones. I believe they're in. Flipping between the two layouts is time consuming. BPMN building blocks. So these are just the BPMNs. It imports the tasks project, and it's all written using Java. So if you were to look at some of the old infrastructure flows, like create VF module infra, it's been broken up into assign VF module, create VF module, and activate VF module. I guess I have to swap my screen here to show the Camunda editor. Stop that. And, why won't you find Camunda? All right, desktop it is. So these flows are basically built by just calling the task layer. So query SDNC is just using the expression to call the Spring Bean and a method.
Steve, I
pull the
think
data at execution.
your screen is only shared for the editor. It's not fully screen. Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So
Steve,
these are using the yes. Go ahead.
Steve, question about the expression. So whenever you call the Java and you call the expression, I look at the expression. Then first one is they passing execution to inject execute. Execute inject execution dot execute. They pass execution, and also the second parameter get variable G building block execution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then second one is every call is calling same thing. So it's kind of a boilerplate to me. So any other case you're not calling G block execution other than that? Or my suggestion is it possible the inject execution have another second method and just passing execution and get the delegate execution implementation itself, because we already have execution here? I don't know, just
yeah, it was a design choice that we could revisit, for sure.
Okay.
We didn't want to bleed the Camunda execution object into the Java layer, assuming that maybe you would want to use this Java code outside of Camunda itself.
Okay.
And that was the path that we took. It's not perfect. If you can think of a better way to accomplish that, I would have no problem changing it.
Yeah, this is fine. This is fine, but just all the Java calling, you have to put the boilerplate for second.
Yeah, it's kind of a pain to do all this boilerplate in this layer and the BPMN. I agree with you. The goal was to try and say if you could supply these tasks with our kind of just our object, we don't care whether this came from Camunda, like this is our own implementation. So if it came from activity or something else, ideally you should be able to reuse this stuff. So we didn't put that to a test. So, right. But if there's a better way, we tried to use like an interceptor in Camunda to attempt to do that and some other things, and it didn't work out. So if you're more familiar with Camunda and you have a suggestion, let us know. I mean, we'll change
for
it.
now, simple suggestion is just creating second parameter. I'll send the email to you, but this is simple, not injection. Okay, I'll send the offline.
Yeah.
So that means we just sending one execution parameter. So anyway, just a comment. It's good. It's good.
Yeah, no problem. So the idea of these flows, at least when we were thinking about them, is that they would represent ideally operations on nodes in Tosca, that you would do your assign, create, and activate, which is kind of the ecomp standard install workflow. It's clearly not the Tosca standard install workflow, but that was our first attempt. And that's what we were attempting to do here. You can chain them together. There's a wrapper called execute building block. And this is basically, you can call it to execute any of these building blocks with the BB suffix. It will grab all the data from ANAI catalog database and the request database, and it will create that building block object for you that we're passing around. So each individual flow is not doing the fetches. It's a lot easier in ANAI to grab the subgraph in one shot. And then if that building block has a failure, it will check some tables to see if you want to do a rollback, a retry, an abort, or open a manual task for a user. We have some use cases internally where we need to do that. But that's configured via the database tables, okay? And this will just call the building block. It does some validation against status, which is the orchestration status on the node in ANAI. It'll silence success if you try to assign something that's already assigned, etc. If you try to activate something that's not assigned, it will choke. And you have some generic retry handling around all your building blocks. So you don't have to build that into absolutely every flow, whether you want to do retries. Now the retry is at the building block level, not the individual service level, or to ANAI or SDNC. It's at the actual flow level. If you wanted to build retries even lower, we have some of that in the Java code, I believe the ANI client will retry for network connectivity issues. The SDNC client still needs a little bit of code like that. If you're not using the ANI client, then it won't retry automatically. Yeah.
I wonder, could you define exactly what is meant here by building block? It seems to be something very specific to the design.
So it was an attempt to break up kind of the larger infrastructure flows that we used to have, and it's really meant to represent just an abstract set of tasks, a logical unit of work, I guess, is how I would describe it. It was a term coined before I joined the team. At least internally in AT&T, they were calling basically subflows building blocks. But that's really what they are. I don't know if that explains it well enough or not.
Well,
maybe
in my mind, they should be implementations of operations Kafka, but they're not really there yet. So
okay, let me give a try, Tal, here. So what building blocks we are actually talking about is like the repetitive steps, right? Basically, call to SDNC, call to ANDI, call to different controllers, different the repetitive steps. These will be mostly generic. What we wanted to put is that those the only data will change, but the interactions and other things will still remain the same. So our main idea to have this building block structure is to have those things as a common block, which can be reused based on your use cases and all. And if you want to build a customized flow tomorrow, you don't require to entirely build the complete workflow. You can use these building blocks. On top of it, you can actually build your own service level components. Service level workflows and all.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding too. Also, the building block is common, and also ONAP is a platform. So I think in my mind, building block means we provide a reference implementation common. So whenever do custom, they can pick and choose the existing, like Lego. They're building the like component base. So that's that's my understanding.
Okay, maybe if you can. Let me put it my way and tell me if I'm right. So, all of these things are tasks really, but specifically the building blocks are orchestration tasks. So the building blocks are exactly the orchestration that ONAP does. Does that sound correct?
Yes. Yeah, a chain of building blocks is what we're doing, yeah.
So I'm just thinking,
but it's a part of the job.
I'm thinking a little bit ahead in terms of the work that I'm doing, and what I will try to do is actually represent these building blocks as workflow steps in Tosca. So the idea is that directly in Tosca, you'd be able to assemble these according to whatever makes sense for that particular service that you're designing in Tosca.
And that's really what our thought was when we were trying to build them, but we're not good at Tosca in my shop. So that was the idea. Ideally, you'd be able to chain these together in a Tosca orchestrator to do something interesting. Right now, we have a reference database implementation in here. If you look at the macro flow, it's doing it in a kind of a dirty way where it's kind of Tosca informed, but not really properly Tosca done. If I can find that flow, macro. I'll find the flow. But that was the idea. I agree with the direction you're stating there, Tom.
Can you also see what a macro is here? What is a macro?
A macro is essentially a chain of building blocks. So let's say you wanted to spin up an entire service. The macro flow looks at our crude RDBMS representation of the Tosca and says, okay, I know there's this VNF in that Tosca in our database that has these VF modules with this network with this volume group. And the macro flow will spit out a chain of building blocks that need to be executed in order to create that service. And then it will dynamically call the building block endpoints based on that information. I believe it's in common. See where we actually, since we just moved this and something between two layouts, I sometimes get confused where the BPMNs are sitting. Maybe it's workflow actions. Yes.
Even you will also find them in core and common. Both of them will have that.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking for the latest. I think we actually called it workflow action.
Okay,
Probably
so
should be called macro, but
the term macro here is very specific to the SO code. It's not a.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, I got it. All right.
One
But
question.
ideally, it kind of. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. One question. Sorry. One question to tell. You think the when you generate the BPM, and so based on the Tosca some type, you try to connect the dot to building block, or that's the.
I don't know yet. I'm going to have to delve into the building blocks that are available.
I mean, that
and-
could be nice because you designed some Tosca some resource type whatever, define it, and then if you, for example, VNF whatever, then you connect the dot to this building block. I mean, you automatically have some component. I don't know, just a thought, wild thought. Anyway.
Yeah, that's
I mean, that
kind of
was. Yeah.
there are some limitations in Tosca. For example, the workflow steps. I mean, the declarative workflows were introduced in Tosca fairly recently in version 1.1. And that's one part of Tosca that is not object-oriented. So you can't really take a workflow step and turn it into a type. However, some of the actions that you can take are interface-based. So my thought process right now is actually to define interface types that kind of match the building blocks. But I'm also trying to keep an open mind because I know you guys didn't design the building blocks to be specifically oriented toward Tosca. So there might be an opportunity here to maybe rethink how the building blocks are designed. But anyway, we have to start somewhere. So I'll start with what we have and see how far that takes me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting place. So this is the workflow action. It probably should be renamed workflow macro, but what it essentially is doing is looking at our database and figuring out an execution path of building blocks to make a service created in ANAI and inventory, talking to the controllers and talking to OpenStack. And basically, I'll see if I can get one of these from a test environment for one of our meetings, but it will read some reference data and read the catalog database plus the request that VID sends us and calculate the execution path and chain together the building blocks to create your service. You can, in the reference data, if you wanted to override a building block, you can say, well, instead of using the base assign VNF building block, you can use, assign custom VNF building block. So if you want to override the default install with your custom implementation, you can create your own building blocks. But this is just chunking through. It's selecting which one to execute. It's dynamically creating the endpoint, and then it's calling it as a subflow. And I would envision I would hopefully eventually delete this entire thing, and it would be driven off Tosca. But in our timeline, we didn't have enough time to build that. So this is the intermediate solution. And there's a fair amount of code behind these that you can read.
So Tal, one question for you. So how good are we with declarative form of having this whole stuff? Because one thing is about building blocks. Another thing which I can envision is that going forward, we should have the declarative way of doing it. One is imperative, right? And we are very imperative with respect to BPM and a way of doing it. But talking about Tosca, then I think we have to have a declarative way of on the fly able to pick up things and then moving forward. So how good is it really to do with that? I know it's a little off topic, but just 2 minutes if you can spare that time and let us know.
Sure, I'll do it very quickly. This is important to go through this. So yes, the workflows in Tosca 1.1 are declarative, and also policy triggers. That's another aspect to think about. But to make it truly generic, I think so. Tosca also defines the membrane that connects to the native orchestration artifacts. So, for example, the dream of Tosca is that the CSAR file not only includes the YAML files defining the topology, but it can also include artifacts that would actually be that you can actually run on in the cloud environment. So this could be scripts, this could be Ansible playbooks, this could be really any kind of artifact. And then you define interface types that are specific for those implementations. So ideally, maybe ONAP can support a few different interface types. that match the life cycle and other features that you have within ONAP. And then, say, a VNF vendor could contain, within their CSER file for their solution, the artifacts that you can run. So rather than the building blocks being here, included in the Java code, hard-coded and compiled, they would be included in the CSAR file and executed at the lower level of the controllers. But that kind of a little bit might break the Etsy Mano separation model.
I was coming there, right? I was exactly coming. Because I mean, Etsy Mano is one part. The other thing is we are actually turning out to be SDO, right? I mean, we have to have workflow level of SDOs, which is like this is a standard way of defining it. You just have to be inherent to this. Only then I'll be able to call your CSAR package with the interface exposed. Well, I think we have to have a lot of brainstorming on that. It's a good idea, but I think maybe we will have a session on that.
Sure. One step at a time.
When we have a separate session, let me know. It's interesting because for many, right?
Surely. I mean, what I will do is let's put it this way. Steve, sorry for interrupting you in between, but I just want to make this. Maybe we'll have the SO weekly meeting continuing as it is with the actual focus on the ONAP delivery. We will have this Friday meeting, bi-weekly or whatever it is possible, with your permission, guys, with all your consensus, if it's okay. We can have this particular meeting to have the discussions beyond the future plan and or something like that, okay? So that way we will not disturb the actual flows because we have close to 6 to 7 weeks for the delivery. We will not disturb that, but maybe we can take up this as a special platform where we can discuss this thing and just enlighten ourselves. Will that be okay with you, people? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I think it's fine, but if you can delay 30 minutes, it could be nice. I have a standing meeting 9 to 10. So I mean, anyway, we can talk. Okay.
Okay.
But just 30 minutes
Sure.
delay.
Maybe we can have this meeting itself for 30 minutes. That's also fine with me. That's
okay.
Absolutely fine. Or maybe timing part we can check here and there.
Okay.
But if it's okay to have 2 weekly meetings, I mean, not every week, of course, but event based, then it will be good enough to take it up. Okay. So back to you, Steve.
Okay, so ASTC controller was touched a little bit. Some of it was just breaking it up into smaller methods. The older code was just one giant method. So I didn't rewrite a significant portion of it, but just extracting methods out. It should only be doing one persistence where it's doing the service.save. Since Hibernate is properly linking all the entities, you're just building the one service entity and saving it. It should be using equals and hash codes to detect duplicates in the database. There shouldn't be all this special manual logic for, hey, does this duplicate exist or not? That kind of stuff was removed. And then there was a strange way to manually test loading of CSARs, and that was just expanded out. There are some small examples here in ASTC REST interface test where you can post a CSAR and it will, go ahead, process the CSAR, check the database. You can run those cases. If you have CSARs in ONAP that you know are valid, I could write more test cases. I'm not sure where to pull those from. So ASTC controller is not massively changed. I mean, instead of building a single entity, saving it, building a single entity and saving it, now you're just building one large entity. So you're not doing these 1Z, 2Z type operations. If we were to look at like networks, it's just gonna find the artifact if it exists and then build it out. It's just building POJOs, which if you're familiar with this code, I feel sorry for you. It's not fun to modify. But hopefully we can get away from that. I mean, that's another kind of large refactoring item, is getting away from our twisting of the Tosca. Like, we need to understand it better, but the way that we're twisting it to RDBMS is complicated and problematic. It's growing wildly out of control as new things are introduced. Next project, SDNC adapter is not very interesting. Not much has changed. We added some unit tests. it's now Spring Boot container, standard things there, standard configuration. You'll see Rob push the first set of, the Docker images build, he pushed the first set of Docker Compose stuff. Probably the more interesting changes are in catalog DB adapter. I know.
They're verify failing
okay.
still, Steve. Yeah. Yeah, because
SDNC
Rob is
pushed
going
an
on
update. SDNC pushed an update last night or this morning that they removed a bunch of code goes from their model without changing the version of their artifact. So they said they would push a fix soon. So catalog DB has changed a bit. Obviously, we have our JPA repos. You have your existing REST services, which are left intact. They're using, we rewrote JPA repos to query them. Also, it's exposed to Spring Data REST. So you have a choice of not using this custom coded like queries anymore. Okay, the Spring Data REST endpoint is exposed. You can query it using those semantics. You can write and expose JPA repos using those. The other interesting change in here is that instead of manually managing migrations, it's all done using Flyway. We're using Flyway 4. We'll eventually bump it to 5 when we move to Spring Boot 2, but there's just a number of changes between Spring Boot 1.5.13 to Spring Boot 2. It's not really backwards compatible, so we have to actually change stuff. So your migrations are in here. A lot of these are just reference data, but essentially you will bump the version if you need to change something. So if you had to add or modify catalog DB, it would be version 3.9. You could do 9.1 or .10, depending on what you're doing, and it will automatically execute these in order. So it'll apply the base version, apply all your migrations. It'll store it within the schema version table that Flyway maintains, and then you can query that or ask Flyway to do repairs or rollbacks. It stores all of the history. There's wonderful documentation online about Flyway if you're not familiar with it. Basically, when the Spring Boot app starts up, it will run these. It shares the load across multiple instances, so it's fine in a pod in Kubernetes. We will squash these down into a new base version at some point whenever we decide this is too many. If that's now, that's fine. I can squash these into like a version 2 base version. The same is true for the request DB adapter, so it's the exact same layout. Okay, we have the existing queries. It's exposed as Spring Data REST, so if you want to access it over REST, just use that going forward. I'd rather not custom code the endpoints anymore. And again, it uses Flat. There's a lot less migrations on this one. We did add the ability that it does archiving of old requests because they were backing up on our system. So that's controlled via property file. I think currently it's set to 60 or 90 days. It'll clear out the request DB table. Well, it'll move them to an archive table. Not a lot of interesting things there. If you look at the profiles, this is using the bcrypt algorithm instead of whatever we were using previously. It's pretty standard to use that in Spring. These are all changed. Let's see, if we walk through, you got your Spring data source. That's pretty standard. We do have actuator exposed. Yes.
Yeah, one particular thing is that people, I hope people know what's the difference between BEPL and a BPMN, right here? Because I have been getting some private mails on BEPL versus BPMN. If you are aware, then it's okay. Otherwise, maybe we can quickly turn on that. So anyone has any question on BEPL and BPMN?
So the question is, I think the BPL is the old one, and then we're not using BPL in my mind. We're using BPMN 2. And then some people using it interchangeably, but it's different one to me.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with your statement.
Because in the BPMN1, there is no execution concept. That's why using the BPL for execution. But BPMN2, there's built-in execution. We're not using BPL any longer. But I saw many code, I don't know, came from old code, but still calling BPL. Some architect document they're calling BPL. So someone in my company, Ericsson, they call me, we are using BPL, or something. So I don't think so. But anyway, it's confusion here. Okay.
Okay. So any other thoughts, guys? Okay, so BPL basically is the language which was initially brought in to have this workflows and all defined from this perspective, and BPM is more like a notation which is the standard body and all. So going forward, we will not have BPL anymore. BPM in 2.0, as Byung rightly said, is the standard which has been accepted worldwide to have the process level definitions for the workflows. And what we are using right now is BPMN 2.0. We are no more BPL based. We are using BPMN in our, the technology which we are using or the notation which we are using is BPMN or BPL. But BPL is been there in certain things. You can ignore that BPL and consider it's BPMN only right now. Okay.
Okay. So previously you would have seen like separate products for network tenant and DNF adapter. Those are just all condensed under MSO OpenStack adapters, although it does have a Cloudify plugin, so maybe they should be named a little better. They basically serve the same purpose. They're an adapter around our cloud orchestrator. Not much has changed in here. Obviously, the DB queries have changed the JPA repos. Beyond that, we haven't done much. We have added some unit tests. Basically, well, I wouldn't call them unit tests. They're integration tests. Okay, we're sending a REST request. We're mocking OpenStack, and we're verifying the results in the mock as well as some other assertions. It's difficult to unit test this code. I think there's, multiple thousand line methods in there that just need to be looked at. But that has been there for a while. Not much has changed. But it's, I guess once we figure out, I assume this will be more legacy support, and eventually we'll be talking to multi-vim if that's the roadmap plan. I'm not exactly sure where that's going. But here is the VNF adapter. Not much has changed in here. This is the declared interface. The implementations are all here. The volume implementations, networks, it's just combined. The base application class is in here. Interestingly enough, this one's using CXF configuration. Since we're using JAX-WS, it's a lot easier to just publish those as the WSDLs. CXF is pretty standard container technology. It's hosting this Swagger. We did delete some stuff. Some projects are just no longer here. Like the workflow message resource project was entirely deleted. It was an odd proxy that it was basically proxying callbacks to the Camunda engine. So instead of doing that, we just send the callbacks directly to the Camunda engine. Through those REST services, which is in the MSO BPMN infrastructure project. These are the services, right? These callback handlers that are being called. They're not, they're just directly wired here. Let me think about what else was deleted. It's hard to tell to do a full diff, obviously. It has an async pool. One of the things we did notice in a lot of containers, threads were being held. So there was a lot of synchronous you'd get a callback from SDNC to SDNC adapter. That thread was not async. It would say request to the Camunda engine, and that thread was replying synchronously. So we were just holding things until Camunda responded. So a lot of that was moved to true async behavior, where it's just going to get an ACK and do its work in the background. And you'll see the declarations in the code where you'll see we're using the Spring async annotation. Let me just think of where we're doing that in one of these callback handler or workflow async resource, I think is one of them. So it will just call start process. Before we weren't even using a thread pool. It was just starting new threads. So you could get overrun pretty easily if you wanted to overrun this web service that was hosted, or this REST API. you could just send 300 requests and start 300 threads. Right now, it is using a thread pool. I have to test what would happen if you try to overrun the thread pool. I imagine it'll be rejected, but it's actually using a thread pool. It's using the async context in Spring. All the logging is using the interceptors. That's something we heard last time, but since this is the recording, we implemented JAX-RS interceptors, and I have to check if I did the JAX-WS ones or if I didn't get to it, but they will do all of the audit and metric logging for us. Well, you see we're copying the MDC context here off the thread that initiated this async. So all the information is stored in MDC for logging. This is basically the same thing as before, except it's using an async thread pool. Some of the biggest changes are in like how we, in the newer BPMN code, how we're doing some of the JUnit stuff. We're actually just using mocks and mock beans and asserting behaviors instead of spinning up the entire BPMN, writing 20 wire mock endpoints and trying to verify all the wire mock endpoints. We ported the VFC adapter over and attempted to add some unit tests. I am not very familiar in this code. So if someone is on the call, please take a look. Make sure I didn't break anything, hopefully. All the JUnits and everything passed. We added some JUnits, but I don't have a running instance of the VFC to test it against. And but you can let me know. I think that's mostly it that I can think of off the top of my head to cover. The Docker Compose stuff is pushed. We'll probably have a second session on both Docker Compose and the Helm charts. The Helm charts are being worked with the OOM team. And Ramesh from my team will give an overview of those.
Hey, Steve, did you do anything to the homing portion?
Yes. Did I do anything to the homing portion? So all the BPMN and Groovy stuff is left mostly intact. We didn't touch anything. The only thing that we did touch in that area is the Groovy stuff was logging in an extremely strange way. It had like a wrapper around a wrapper around a wrapper to log things, and then there was all these special properties to turn debug on and off. It was like we wrote our own, I don't know what to call it. So all of that was ripped out, and it's just using MSO logger, which is just really now wrapping SLF4J, and I'll probably try to go to just straight SLF4J or the new ONAP logging library that they pushed out. I was reading about that yesterday instead of using MSO logger. So that's the only changes there. The other change that affects the Groovy is previously they're writing URN properties as variables in every single BPMN. So when we were defining URN properties, every single BPMN got every single URN property. And that is problematic as BPMN saves those to the database. So even if you didn't need, and it was probably more than 50, 70 properties, they were all flushed to the database for every BPMN. So that was changed to just read from the Spring properties. So those are the two changes to Groovy. So the homing stuff should be intact. Now, I think I have your test ignored, Marcus, because it was failing on parsing the JSON sample that was in there. I think we exchanged an email a while ago about that. So I have to go back and look and see if it's still ignored.
Yeah, I remember that.
So those are the only two changes. Yeah. So there's no longer like this weird dot delimited, hey, this flow is logging or not logging. It's simply class-based, as you kind of would expect, right? So whatever your Groovy class name is, you can turn the logging on or off. By default in ONAP, we have our ONAP package set to debug, since most labs will do that. If you're running it in production, tune the logs to whatever you want. But the current logback-spring that's enabled on all the containers has org ONAP SO set to debug. If you want to turn it to info, go ahead. And if you want to turn trace on, you can. We wrote a script that took all the previously in Groovy, I saw just thousands of statements of entering this method, exiting this method. So instead of deleting those, we moved them to trace. I probably would have just deleted them, but for now, we just moved them down to the finest logging level. Other than that, the Groovy stuff is unchanged. Most of that has been regression tested, at least internally for us. We're going to start regression testing once the containers are up and working on the virtual firewall case, the VCPE case, and Mark, if there's any cases you need to run with OOF, just add a task in Jira, and we'll assist in any way we can on that. I want to try and make sure all of that works very early on, not be firefighting like last release. I'm not as familiar with the OOF case. I'm fairly familiar with the Smyro stuff, which I think OOF is a fork of that at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I think that's most of that. Yeah, most of the Groovy is completely left untouched. So whatever's there, minus the logging and properties lookup. We have been going through the code and cleaning up. And you'll probably see a commit at some point. The ANAI interactions in the Groovy code, we are finding it extremely difficult to keep up with their changes with how the Groovy is currently written, and we know we're going to have to support it for a little bit, so we're taking that out and rewriting it with the ANAI REST client. So you'll see some of those changes posted at some point. And that'll be probably across the board, because we just want to get rid of these problems where we're building JSON and templates and subbing them in Groovy. We find that to be very error prone internally, and we get a lot of bugs around it because quite often things are not properly encoded. So we've been cleaning some of that up. You'll see some of those commits be pushed out. The other commits you'll see being pushed out is, we have a hard-coded cloud owner right now. So we're cleaning that up. That commit will be pushed out. Right now, I think it's hard-coded to ATT-AIC, which is bad. I know we hit that in a couple of use cases in Beijing where that was problematic. So that is being cleaned up entirely. And we'll keep pushing more JUnits. We have quite a few people working on the OpenStack adapters trying to get that coverage to be more reasonable. I think it's a lot of lines of code with the least amount of coverage right now.
So that change
you'll see some of that being pushed.
Cloud owner? Is that also a change where you're going to get that from ESR and AAI? And what about the cloud region IDs? Is that also going to happen?
So I know ONAP had a separate use case where they wanted to get it from other systems. Right now, the code change that we have just removes the hard coding and pushes it to the interface. So on SO from BID or another northbound interface, you could specify it. If you have a different requirement, can you send it to me? I'm not aware of it, but if there's something I can do, then we'll look at it.
We have a task internally to
what is
grab from
ESR?
AAI just as an option, so that
okay,
because there's a sort of endpoint for multi-cloud. There's an OpenStack proxy API for multi-cloud that sort of allows you to use OpenStack's API, but all you need to do is build the right endpoint, and we want to be able to enable that. So we're considering getting that from AAI and using that in that endpoint build. I
think that commit that cleans up at least the hard coding should be ready at some point next week, and then you can take a look and see if that makes your life any easier.
Sure. Sounds good.
My goal was just to remove all the strange hard coding of ATT-AIC and allow it to be specified on the interface. I think the other change is the cloud config.json, which is kind of growing unruly, is moved to a database table, so you could either throw events or REST APIs at it and update it on the fly. As we look at like 5G, if you're spinning up lots of little clouds to register that stuff for us to talk to it or multi-them to talk to it, you would want something a little bit more dynamic than just the hard-coded JSON file. It's kind of hard to update at runtime. So that is a commit that's coming. Yeah, if you can send me the requirement, I'll read it too, Marcus, to see if there's anything that we could do
and
there.
how about this SDC side of, sorry.
Yeah, so how about this MSO JSON, which is actually blocking us from SDC side Tosca distributions and all? I mean, we had one issue with that.
MSOJs.
Yeah, the one which is actually blocking us from the pre-Tosca distribution from HDC side, right? We had one problem which is like hard coding stuff, which we discussed in Beijing.
Hard coding. So what stuff are you talking about as hard code session?
Maybe we can take it offline. I'll just show you the code which I'm talking about. Sorry, I'm actually on mobile and I can't show the code right now. Maybe I'll talk to you offline, and maybe next week we can have that particular thing discussed.
There's so many hard coded stuff that we probably changed that I don't know which one you mean.
Yeah, I understand. I'm talking of the one which is in the ASDC controller right now. The one which is actually, there's a property file which is what we have configured for a temporary fix in the ATT MSO, which was made a seed code, and it actually still lies there. So we have to resolve it as soon as possible. Especially for the distribution which is coming from STC, we have to do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think because this properties file is pretty basic. So you're gonna have to tell me what's hard coded in here, but this is pretty basic. So let me know what it is. There shouldn't be anything hard coded in, well, ASTC controller is a little strange, but as far as I know, there shouldn't be anything hard coded. Let me know what it is.
Okay, I'll get back to you with the details.
I mean, this was.
Yeah, this component is okay. This component is okay. This is basically for the distribution further down. I understand. There was one particular JSON file, which is what I'm talking about. I'll come to you on that. No problem.
I mean, yeah, I changed all the properties, so I don't know if there's a separate JSON file that no longer exists, or I don't know. Let me know. Okay. I guess the short of it is, let me know.
Sure thing. So, any other questions, guys? Steve, or in general?
One question, Steve. You are doing great. One question. So, we still have some of the old BPMN with the Groovy. So, in Casablanca, we have a plan to migrate further to Java than this, or just plan?
So I think we kind of have the old legacy stuff that we want to keep there probably for at least one more release, and the new Java stuff. So if we can certify, the existing use cases on the new code, then we can plan in Dublin to remove the other code. We want to run the use cases on both flows. So you can select either on API handler on the interface, there's a tag called what API you want to use, whether you want to use the VNF API, which really correlates to the older BPMNs and the older Groovy, or you want to use generic resource API, which correlates to the newer BPMNs and the Java code. So when the community feels like we can drop support for the old code, that's fine. I have no issues blocking it in ONAP. If you told me I could delete it today, I would, but it's not my choice solely, right? I don't know who else has deployed this code or is using it in any kind of certified use cases on the GR API. So once that's done, then yeah, we can delete it. I will be so happy to submit that commit.
But one more thing, just to add to that, maybe what we can do is going forward, the new code which is being developed or new cases which are coming up, we can actually stick to Java. That way we'll have a better thing than to come back and all. Okay. And the thing which will help us is that, like Steve is saying, if we want to delete that old code which is good, it still remains legacy, or someone want to use it internally, they can actually have it as a reference. But surely we want to encourage Java going forward. So maybe all the new code which we are developing, we better do it in Java. That would be the right path forward.
Hey, can I quickly ask, what was the motivation for dropping Groovy?
There was not one, Tal, actually. There were many issues, especially the problem was with respect to the kind of maintenance, actually. When you go into the actual deployment and all, we had a lot of issues tackling with Groovy because we didn't have a proper debugging setup and all. Loggings were not proper. In fact, the state of the system and all, we were not able to track it. There was some of this. And of course, the other problem is that industry expert also, going forward, because if we are talking about open source community, we usually have more Java people than Groovy people, right? The industry expert from the perspective of the percentage, we know where we are standing. These are a few. And apart from that, the Groovy actually requires you to be having a specific scripting thing and all to come up with. Java is more of a language, and you have more flexibility with respect to the plugin-based development model. So these are some of the factors which we considered while thinking of going forward with Java than with Groovy.
Well, okay.
Guys, any other questions? Well, if not, thanks, Steve. Yeah, sorry, someone was asking something.
Any other questions you could send on the mailing list, I'll answer. I mean, obviously you're going to be reading through code, and you may have questions about why we did something, and just ask, and I'll give the best response I have.
Sure. And guys, I'm also trying to have a separate mailing list for SO. As I said, there's a bombardment which is happening. Maybe some of the mails I'm missing to reply, some of the mails you're trying to ask, and also I'm also trying to have a separate mailing list for SO. If that is successful, it will be much better, where we can have our own forum where we can discuss multiple things and ensure that replies are coming faster. If not, we will stick to ONAP discuss with SO tag, and that should be good to go. Okay. With that, thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot for this elaborative stuff and all. If anyone has any other questions, please do mail us, and I'm sure Steve will actually ensure that he'll reply to whatever extent he can. But one more thing I want to say is that right now there is a little crunch time where we have to wind up with the existing Casablanca and all. We were waiting for this code merge to happen, as I've been telling it. Now you understand why we have been waiting for the code, not many maximum part of the code. I didn't want to merge before this code merge, because eventually we will end up with a lot of confusion to merge it back to the old code and new code and all. So now is the time when we have 6 weeks close to our M4, and we have to wind up with all the stories, and also we will focus mainly on each of the tasks and ensure that we are meeting the targets with all the respective goals, to ensure the pair-based testing and other hurdles which we faced in M2 and all will not come in Beijing will not be coming back again. I want all your support. So next week, the weekly meeting of SO will continue to focus on that. I hope you people will support in that, and let's see a bright future for ONAP. Thank you. Any other questions, please? Yeah, please respond in mail. I'll be glad to help you. And Steve is anyways there to help us with respect to the code and all. Thank you.
Thanks, SG. Thanks, Steve. I just wanted to say I like the idea of the own mailing list. That's actually a really good idea.
Sure. Let's see what can happen there.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.